You're listening to When God Intervenes, the podcast where faith, hope, and healing come together for families with a loved one battling addiction. Hey, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of When God Intervenes. I'm your host, Daryl Rogers, and I'm here today with Jennifer Chase. Jennifer's joining me from Boise, Idaho. Jennifer is the daughter of an alcoholic, right, Jennifer? And is in recovery herself, long-term recovery, and has a child who is in recovery. She owns Rise Addiction Life Coaching, the owner and founder. And so she does life coaching for people who are probably in early recovery or battling addiction. So we're going to find out more. I'm going to find out along with you as we talk to Jennifer a little bit here. Really beautiful country out there. I know it has to be in Boise, Idaho. And I've never visited the state. I'll have to get out there sometime.
You need to get out here. We are a blessed folk out here in Idaho with the beauty that we get to experience every day.
Yeah, for sure. I can imagine. Just seeing the photos. About the closest I've gotten is California, and maybe Washington.
Washington is closer to what it's like out here. We don't have any oceans. We just have a lot of mountains and rivers and just God's beauty, really.
Yeah. How about trout fishing?
Yep, we have that too.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. I used to do some fly fishing. I haven't in years now, but I've never fished in any of the streams out west. So I can imagine what that would be like. Why don't we start out just talking about your story a little bit and your journey? How did things start out growing up? What was that like?
Yeah. So I come from long lines of addiction. So I've been able to find about 4 generations down my mom's side and about 4 generations down my dad's side of what was mostly alcoholism. Growing up, I had a grandma in the 50s that was an opiate addict before that was kind of a thing to be. But for the most part, my family kind of danced in the disease of alcoholism. And I didn't really know different. Right. It was just, when we were at the lake, you crack one open at 9:00. And I just thought that was normal. And I don't remember a night where there wasn't alcohol consumed in my home. And so it wasn't unusual for me. But unfortunately, I am part of a statistic of this thing that says 1 out of every 4 girl and 1 out of every 4 boy that's sort of raised in that dynamic of addiction is sexually abused. And I was sexually abused by my mom's dad. And so that was going on sort of, during my childhood. And additionally, my dad was an alcoholic. Now, this is the thing about my dad. Like, my dad was my guy. Like, he was the one person on this earth that I knew loved me. But the inconsistencies of his drinking were very confusing for me as a child. I didn't know who he was going to be when he got home from work. Was he going to be my guy, or was he going to be, angry and loud and sometimes even emotionally abusive? I didn't know. And then my mom, who is weird to say this, but I don't know if anyone out there has had a mom that kind of, you didn't really get one another, right? Like, if she spoke English, I spoke German. We never really had the same emotions. We never articulated emotions the same. And so we didn't really understand each other. And then I had an older sister and an older brother who really got along with each other, but I was kind of the man out, if you will, as the sort of youngest of that trio. And there was a common denominator to every single one of these relationships, whether it was the abuse I was suffering from my grandfather, or my dad's inconsistencies, or my mom not necessarily being my person, or my sister and brother not liking me. And the common denominator to every single one of those situations was me. Like, I knew with all certainty from a very young age that I was the problem, right? If I could just be happier, if I could just be less emotional, if I could just be something else, then all of these relationships, these important relationships, the only relationships really I had early on, would be better. They would feel like I was okay. And so I started to learn very early on in my life that isolation was the safest place for me. Like, if I could just barricade myself in my bedroom, and I did a couple of times of, like, all the record players and stuffed animals and things that were in my little bedroom at that age, if I could just put them up against the wall and keep the outside world from getting in, then I was going to be okay.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And sort of, I looked from that point on, I looked for the universe to tell me that I wasn't lovable. And I would be like, well, there it is again, right? And because of that experience, I lost my faith pretty early on. And I think this is a normal story for people that are suffering significant abuse as a child. Like, I believed that God was one of those people that kind of said, yeah, you're not worth fighting for, really. Right. Like, I had
Mhm.
no reason to believe that he felt any different than my mom or my dad or my siblings. And so that faith journey was one that got pretty sort of interrupted early on.
Yeah, I get that. Or at least I think I get it. I would just say that now I was kind of scrolling social media this morning and I came across a video and a couple of different ones that I looked at talking about trauma
Yeah.
and just kind of putting it in my own words. I've never suffered the kind of trauma that you're describing. I guess we all have some trauma in our lives, and certainly losing a child in a tragedy that was traumatic. And maybe somebody else is famous for saying this, and I'm just picking it up from there. But trauma is not so much what happens to us as much as it is the stories that we tell ourselves about what happens to us. It seems like 98, 99% of people I run into out there, they're either struggling with some kind of a self-esteem issue, whether they're addicted to drugs or not. That has nothing to do with it. Most people struggle with self-esteem issues, and they have these negative stories that are going over and over and over in their minds about what a terrible person they are, and they're no good at this and they're no good at that, and nobody loves them, just like what you were just saying.
Yeah. Well, and I think too, there's a shame component to this. And oftentimes when I sit with other alcoholics and addicts and I share my story, they're like, Jennifer, I didn't
Mm.
have anything that happened in my life like you did. Like, I don't know why I have shame. And oftentimes people have shame for having shame. Because what can also be true is that the trauma that you're experiencing or the shame that's starting in your life could simply be, I feel like, a square peg in a round hole,
Mm.
right?
Hmm.
Like,
Yeah.
my family is all round and I am square.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
and that is what sort of starts that experience of shame and some traumatic experiences where the narrative kind of starts playing in our really young minds. And it was something, I'm 52 today and I still work on this of unwinding the narratives that started from a place of trauma and abuse and a little kid's brain developing and trying to make sense of the world. And still at 52 I have to sometimes unwind that and try to, like, okay, that narrative is not the version of me that I want to be anymore, but it started those very early years of my life when I was walking through some pretty hard things.
Yeah, I think all of us have to do that. I mean, I'm 64 and I'm still
Yeah.
working on it from time to time, not as much as I used to have to. I've overcome a lot, but yeah, it's still an ongoing process for sure. My wife discovered our son Chase, just a little journal that he had when he was a senior in high school a while back, and journal entries she came across that where he was saying, I just feel like I don't fit in anywhere. And I never heard him say that. He was popular and he was a good athlete and he was a good looking kid and he was funny. Why did he feel that way? Like none of us certainly didn't have a clue. I think most of his friends didn't know he was feeling that way.
Yeah, I've sat with a lot of other alcoholics and addicts. And if I can put my son, I know we haven't talked about him yet, but my son
Mm.
is an addict in recovery. And you just described him, right? A pretty popular kid who was a great athlete and succeeded in that world and looked like he was hysterical and all the things. And yet, if you were to sit here today, he would say to you, I absolutely feel like a square peg in a round hole.
Mm.
I
Mm.
absolutely feel different. And almost every addict that I've ever spoken to says that. And this is why I think the majority of us, I can't say all of us, but the majority of us are very, very deep feelers. We feel
Mm.
things very deeply
Mhm.
and
Mm.
take other people's emotions on for ourselves. And oftentimes we have a hard time delineating between what is our feeling and what we're taking on from somebody else. And so sometimes when we're not super aware of what's happening, it can be rather suffocating.
Yeah.
I would call it a burden most of the time, right? Like, I can see gratitude through it now, but without that sort of self awareness, it can be quite a burden. And oftentimes that's what precipitates sort of that feeling like a square peg in a round hole.
Mhm. Mhm.
Did I just describe your son?
Oh yeah, yeah, and me to some extent as well. I was always quiet and easygoing growing up, and although somehow I managed to get through it without resorting to drugs or alcohol to cope, I always felt that way. In my high school annual, my senior year, you know how they have the senior superlatives.
Yeah.
Well, I was in most quiet. I was voted most quiet by my peers. So, and now I've done a lot of public speaking, but it took a long time to overcome that. And it's still my default. I've just had to continue to work on it. You know, a lot of people struggle with that. There was something you mentioned earlier. I'm sorry to kind of jump back,
Oh,
but you mentioned earlier about your faith because you felt your relationship with God was sort of broken because of probably your thinking as a child, how could there be a God? And don't let me put words in your mouth, but I'm just imagining here that how can there be a God who would allow this sort of thing to happen to me? You know, where is he? You know, and why is he allowing this to happen? Or what I run across a lot of times with people, I run across a lot of folks who are just really angry at God. And one of the things I've discovered is that, and this is just a hypothesis of mine, but it seems like we tend to project onto God the attributes of our biological father a lot of times, or whoever it was that raised us that was in that father role. I just happen to be blessed to have a really good dad. Not perfect, you know, he had his flaws, but he was really, really good. On a scale of 1 to 10, he was right up there at the top. But over the years, I've talked to people who say, yeah, I'm an atheist. But the more I talk to them, I find out they're really angry.
mhm.
And I'm like, well, what are you angry about? You know, and if you dig enough and they're honest with you, usually it goes back to the relationship with either their dad or maybe in some cases their mom.
Yeah, my relationship has been super complicated, as you can imagine.
Mm-hmm.
Early on, there were two things happening to me. One, we would go to church very often growing up, and I couldn't balance between what I was hearing at church and Sunday
Uh,
school and
yeah,
what was happening at my home.
right.
And as a kid, I couldn't make sense to any of that. Like it felt like a lot of hypocrisy. And
Yeah.
it wasn't something that I could hang my hat on as, yes, I see this, I believe this, I feel this. And so I think that was a barrier early on. And then just obviously the abuse and the addiction and the chaos and all the things that were happening in my home. I think
Mm-hmm.
that that's one of the things that is important to know about my childhood is like from the outside looking in, I had it all, right? I grew up
Mm-hmm.
my dad was a very successful businessman. We had all of the things that you could imagine that a good childhood would have. We did all the things. The week that I had chickenpox, I spent in Wrigley Field watching Cubs games, right? Like I had all of these amazing opportunities as a child that most people would be like, yes, I want that life. I want that childhood. But what was going on inside, obviously behind the front door, was very different. And so I had lots of these sort of discrepancies, if you will, in my life. And church was one of them for me. And so it wasn't something that I never questioned because early on it didn't completely make a lot of sense to me.
Yeah. Yeah.
So as I became a teenager and into my early adulthood, I think we can all agree that for most of us, that time is interesting because we're trying to find out what do I believe? Who am I as an adult
Mm-hmm.
as I, move farther away from my parents? And if you can just imagine with me, that time of my life was wild. My parents had just gotten divorced. I started to realize that, I started to drink a little bit, but the most important thing is that I was never going to become an alcoholic. Like I looked at my parents' inability to break the chains of addiction that was generational in my family as pure weakness. Like I thought I had more courage in my pinky finger than they had in their whole body. I was not going to do this. I was going to be the one that broke the chains. So even when I started drinking, I was hyper aware that I wasn't going to use substance to cope with life.
Mm-hmm.
But what did happen during that time was I started to put a connection to if I drink more, I will feel differently. If I drink more, I will be less anxious. If I drink more, this boy will like me. If I drink more, I will be funnier, right? I started to kind of put a correlation to if I use substance, something about me will change. So spiritually during that time was probably the most void of spirituality or a concept of God that reflecting back kind of had. Like at that point I had kind of walked away from it and just said, that seems like a bunch of hogwash, right?
Right. Yeah.
God you are all worshiping out, because that didn't work for me. And then I ended in my early 20s. I ended up getting married and having babies, and I honestly had believed that I had broken the chains of this thing and not in fact become an addict at all, and had started kind of exploring going back to church and finding some peace in that and worshiping. And I was like, okay, like this I can start sort of discovering what I feel and making that connection to my higher power. And then on a Friday afternoon in January of 2003, I was diagnosed with a hemorrhaging brain tumor and given about 12 hours to live unless the surgery had been successful. And so they went in and did brain surgery. Because of the hemorrhaging, I had a lot of nerve damage kind of back there in my cranial nerves and in my head, which led me to chronic pain. And I share this specific event with people, especially those that don't understand kind of what it's like to be in my brain or an addict's brain or their loved one's brain. I was in bed, but I mean, I was high, but I was taking medicine at that point as prescribed. I could hear my family out in the living room playing, my husband and my two kids. They were having a blast. And I was in my bed and I said out loud, as though there were another 10 or 15 people in that room with me, I said, where the hell has this been my whole life? In that moment, this is the part that I want to share for those of you that don't understand what it feels like to be an addict. I didn't care that I had been sexually abused. I didn't care that my mom wasn't my person, or that my dad was an alcoholic, or that my siblings didn't love me, or that I had just literally 2 weeks before that had to say goodbye to my family and didn't know if I was going to survive. I didn't care that I felt like I wasn't even worthy of God's protection growing up. Like in that moment, I could finally breathe. I could finally fit in my skin. I could finally be okay. And I share with people, like, I was addicted from that moment on. And that was the last day that I really had any choice when we're talking about my addiction. And I wasn't addicted physically for probably another couple months, but I was hooked, right? Because all of a sudden I had found the solution. And that's the part I want people to hear me. Substance is not the problem. Substance is the solution to the problem. So if you have a loved one out there and you just want them to stop using because that's going to fix everything, that's like false information, right? Oftentimes, if one just stops using, their problems actually get worse because now they don't have the solution, their only coping skill that they've ever used to deal with life. And so when we get sober, we've got to add lots and lots and lots of different coping skills to replace this one that we had called substance. Because if we don't, we will ultimately go back to substance. But that is, again, during that phase of my life, which is when I started active addiction, that I walked away from my faith altogether. And I walked away from my faith altogether because of the shame that I was experiencing, right? I didn't feel worthy to even ask for a connection or pray for a connection or, experience sort of something that felt like I didn't deserve anymore. So it wasn't until after I got sober that I started again visiting, what does this look like? And I can share with you today, I've been sober for 8.5 years. That connection that I have today is just something that for anybody that has a belief or faith understands, like it is my anchor. It is what helps me or keeps me sober. It is what allows me to do life on life terms. It is what allows me to choose faith over fear every single day. What I realize now as a 52-year-old woman that's been walking through this over the last almost decade is that God didn't leave me. He did not leave me, right? He did not have control over some pretty big sins that were going on in other people's lives. But this is what is so clear to me now, especially doing the work that I do with families, is that he was like, girl, we're going to get through all of this and we're going to use every single bit of this for you to help somebody else. We're going to use that you were abused and went through that trauma. We're going to use that you are a daughter of an alcoholic, that you're in your, right? Like now what I do is help loved ones of addicts navigate this thing and try to find healing. And I only am able to do that because God walked alongside of me the whole way, even when I didn't know he was there, so that I could have this experience now of helping other people navigate and find some peace.
Yeah, that's amazing. I feel a lot the same way. My journey has been much different than yours, but that is when I really began to transform my life, or when God began to transform me. I was already a Christian, but I had so much to learn and so much growing to do, so much spiritual growth that I needed to experience. And really, it was not until after our oldest son died in the wreck that I was coping with all this grief and I'm trying to make sense of it. And that's when I began to dive into, like, okay, what part of this was my fault, or what part of this do I own, and what can I do about it, and how can I help other parents? And that's when I began to change, because and this is the thing that I tell parents, and I'm sure you say the same thing or something very similar to it quite often, is that, there's only one person in this equation that you have any control over, and that's you.
Oh.
And, that's the best hope that you have, is to work on your own spiritual growth, to work on becoming a better communicator, to work on setting and maintaining healthy boundaries and learning how to manage your emotions, work on your own trauma and your own self-esteem. And as you do that, you can have influence with your child or with your loved one battling addiction, but you don't have any control. So it's all about shifting that mindset from one of attempts to control out of fear to one of, I'm going to grow, and hopefully, I'll be an influence on others. But if it doesn't change them, then, there's nothing I can do about that. I have to trust God in that.
You just explained my whole philosophy on how, right? The mamas that come to my office and they're like, no, he needs to be home. Let's say he's 30. No. He needs to be home at 9:45, and I need to be able to look through his phone, and I need to know what he's doing, and I need to see where he's spending his money. And right, it's all fear. It's all fear of trying to control outcomes.
Yeah.
When in reality, you're going to look back at this period of 10 years and go, yeah, I didn't control a darn thing, right?
Right.
I did not stop the train from going down the track. And it's so true, because the only thing that I can control is myself. And this is what I can control. I can control whether I contribute to the solution or I continue to contribute to the problem.
That's right.
That's the only thing, right? We wish that it were instantaneously. We wish that, I have a different mindset now, and all of a sudden 2 days later, my addict gets sober. That's not the way that works,
That's
right? And you speak about the influence. Like, family members are the most influential people in our lives, right? Just even if you have complicated relationships with them, they are still the most influential people in our lives. So as a mom, when I found out that my son was struggling with addiction, I had to figure out how I wanted to influence him. Because the truth is, for years, I influenced him in a negative direction. Right? I showed him how to use substance as his solution. I showed him, I didn't influence him in a positive way. And I will never forget that there was a moment where I decided, oh no, my son deserves for me to model and to influence him in a different way. But this is what was required of me. Hard. It was required of me to sit in some really difficult, uncomfortable situations. Because when I was influencing negatively, it was all rooted in fear. Fear was controlling me. And so I was making decisions through that fear. And when I started making decisions through faith, what it required me to do a lot of the times was to shut my mouth and sit down and allow the consequences of his behaviors to play out in his life. Not add to them. Like, I'm not a tough love gal, right? I'm not like, let's punish people with boundaries and add on to their difficulty. I'm just a girl that's just like, sit down, be quiet, and let this thing play out as their higher power, because he has one and I'm not it. How that plays out in his life, and stop trying to rescue him from the discomfort, because it makes me so wildly uncomfortable.
Mhm,
So you
mhm.
speak about control, and I do have some control. It's whether I contribute it to the solution or continue to contribute to the problem.
That's right.
And my experience is that it's not quick, it's not even guaranteed, right? I
That's
have
right. Yep.
fortunately been to some funerals in my day. I have watched people that are, really not yet ready to get sober and live in recovery. But I've seen the people that have succeeded far more than those other two camps of folk. And maybe more importantly than any of that is the individual's piece, right? The mama's piece, the dad's piece, the family member's piece. Like, I promise you, if you're hearing me right now and you say, Jennifer, you're crazy, when I say you can find peace even if your addicted loved one never gets sober. And I know
Mhm,
people
mhm.
think I'm nuts, but it's true.
It is true, yeah, and I talk about that too. We're really on the same wavelength on so many different things. It's the same with grief. If you've lost a child, if you're a parent who has a child in addiction, and I know you know this because you've walked this path, you're already grieving.
Oh yeah.
You're grieving the child. This no longer the child that you raised. They've been overtaken by their addiction, and you're grieving sometimes the potential, what's going to happen, how is this going to turn out, because your mind plays those things out whether you want it to or not, and it's really hard to not let that happen sometimes. So you're already grieving.
I think what you're talking about is so important because when one gets to a point that's like, okay, I'm ready to be courageous, I'm ready to sit in a lot of discomfort and just
Mm,
learn the lessons in the discomfort of this, right? I'm ready to let God soften my heart or teach me the lessons that I'm supposed to be taught right now rather than trying to control everybody and fix everybody and do all of those things. In that moment, there is almost a requirement, really, if you're going to find peace in the long run, to be able to surrender and come to peace with your worst case scenario, your
mhm,
worst
mm.
fear. And this
Yeah,
is something that parents that don't have addicts as loved one, or anybody really that doesn't have an addict as a loved one, doesn't understand, right? It is almost as though I have already mourned any potential outcome that could come from this, including death, including jail, including losing my granddaughter, or whatever the scenario is, in order to find peace with it and to be in peace with it, we have had to already grieve those
that's
specific
right.
instances. I had a client who unfortunately lost a child to overdose a couple of
Hmm.
months ago, and I had walked with them for years about this. And
Hmm.
they came into my office after their son had died, and I said, "How are you doing?" And his mom just lost it on the couch, and he said, "Jennifer, I've been grieving his death for 10 years.
That's right.
It just finally happened," right?
Yeah.
And people don't understand. What do you mean you grieve your son's death? That's awful. Don't you have hope? Don't you think he can, like, all those things? Yes. Yes, I have hope. Yes, I believe that they can overcome it. Yes, I believe they can find peace. I do believe that with I wouldn't do this work if I didn't believe that, right?
Right.
But I'm not naive to the
Right.
fact that this outcome could happen. And therefore, in order for me to find peace, I must do that work to surrender that worst fear.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's what I was getting at is you can still find joy. If I can find joy in the grief after losing my son, in which, yes, it's been 11 years now, but I still get emotional when I talk about him. But if not a day goes by that I don't find joy. In fact, pretty much my whole day is filled with joy. Everywhere I look around me, I'm just amazed at God's magnificent creation, the people that He puts around me, puts in my path, and so many things to be thankful for and joyful about. I don't, go around having a pity party every day. When we talk about the subject, I get a little bit emotional sometimes. The emotion is really more joy than it is grief. Thinking about all the great memories and the fun times that we had together, and what an amazing person he was, and that sort of thing. It's not tears of grief or despair or anything like that. You mentioned something earlier about how going back to your relationship with God early on, how it was a little bit strained because you were seeing the hypocrisy, and and you were being, and that's in every church. And then there's something I didn't share with you earlier is that I'm a preacher's son. My dad was a Southern Baptist preacher, so I grew up in church, every Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night, and pretty much it was every day because we were always doing something as a family, church related, almost always. And, people who come to church, they come there because all of us are broken people in one way or another. We're all sick people, and we need a doctor, we need a physician, we need a spiritual healer. So that's why we go to church. But certainly God gives people freedom of choice, free will. And could he step in and prevent some of those things? And yes, and I think sometimes he does, and sometimes he chooses not to. And I just have to go, well, you're sovereign, God. I trust you in this. But at the end of the day, like you were saying, what am I going to do with this pain? Am I going to just go curl up in a corner and suck my thumb and feel sorry for myself? Or am I going to, wrestle with all of this self-esteem and all of these negative thoughts about myself the rest of my life? Or am I going to take this pain and allow it to God to use it to shape me and mold me into the person he created me to be? I think I think we're on the same wavelength with that.
So I'm a quote girl. This wall back here, if you're just listening and can't see, I have a wall in the back of my office that has all kinds of quotes. And one of them that it reminded me when you were talking is by a gentleman named Joseph Campbell. And the quote is, "The cave you fear to enter holds the treasure you seek." And the treasure that I was seeking is what you were just speaking about, right? Which is worth and value and joy and peace and all of these amazing things that I now attribute to sort of that relationship with my higher power and the way that I see life now. But what happens with addicts is, and I think this probably happens with a lot of people, but specifically with people that choose substance as a solution, like that cave is too much. It was too much for me, right? It was a mirror for me of my unworthiness and my unlovability and the shame of being sexually abused and the shame of growing up in an addicted home and the conflict that I experienced as a child, because it felt like I was the only one that knew what was going on around here. Like everybody else seemed fine, right? Everyone else, I say this to people, it felt like when everybody was born, they were given a manual of life. Like when you have your first heartbreak, page 35. When you get a flat tire, 172. And when I was born, they were like, sorry, you're going to have to figure out how to do this one on your own.
Right.
Like that's what my childhood felt like. And this cave, walking into it was, I don't even know how to describe it. Impossible, really, right? Just so suffocating. And when I started contemplating getting sober, I realized, oh, we're going to have to go into that thing. We're going to have to sit and go through the discomfort in order to find this proverbial treasure that you speak of. And for me, that treasure really was sort of this connection that I had spiritually all of a sudden, like this understanding that, okay, we got you here. We did this. I know it was hard. I knew you could do it. Right? I had confidence. I believed in you. I knew you could walk through all of this. And here we are. And here's this treasure that you worked so hard for. But the only way to get that is to be willing to be uncomfortable and learn the lesson that God's trying to teach you in that discomfort.
Yeah, I think that's a natural tendency is for us to run away from those things that are uncomfortable instead of embracing the discomfort and leaning into it and asking ourselves, what can I learn from this situation? How can I grow from this? We're right on the same page there. My audience is mostly moms. It's mostly the moms from 35 to 75. That's primarily my audience. There are dads out there who listen to me as well, other family members. What kind of advice do you have? I guess speak directly to the moms out there right now, since you've specifically walked that that path, what advice do you have for moms who have a child that's in active addiction? What kind of things could you say to them?
Yeah, I think this is an interesting question because people have asked me before, like, out of all of the experiences that you've had with addiction, which one is the hardest, right? Like being the daughter, being in active addiction yourself, or being a mama. And I can tell you with 100% certainty that the hardest thing to do in those roles for me, that which hat is the hardest, is being a mama,
Mm,
right? Even in my own addiction, I feel like I have some resemblance of control in the sense that I can wake up every day and move me closer to recovery and transcendence, right? By doing small things every day that I have control over, or moving me closer to a potential relapse. And that gives me some feeling or resemblance of like I can do small things that can help with this outcome.
mhm,
When it comes to dealing with my son's addiction, I have never felt more powerless in my life. Never. Never. Right? And so I first think it's important to know there's people out there that understand what this is feels like. So oftentimes being a loved one or a mama of an addict is as isolating as being the addict yourself. Right? All of a sudden I don't have anything to talk to with my neighbors. We go out to dinner with our friends and I'm just listening to them talk about how wonderful their family is and that their children are graduating from high school and grandbabies are on the way. And all I can think about is the situation that I'm in, and I don't feel like I can share it, right? It becomes
mhm,
your walls start closing in on you as a mama or a loved one as an addict, very similar to what I experienced as an addict myself. And so, one of the things that I would say is that you must find your people. You must find your people that understand the shame that's related to this, the
mhm,
grief, the fact that some of parenting an addict is counterintuitive to what the world thinks parenting should look like, right? And
mhm.
so when you say I did this, people are like, "What do you mean you did that? What do you mean you let your child be homeless?" Right? And they're like, "No, no, 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 I'm trying to contribute to the solution," but they don't have a perspective of understanding. So you must find your people. In a church, oftentimes they have a group for that. I have a client from North Carolina, right?
Uh-huh.
Even in Boise, Idaho, I help people kind of find each other and be able to build that community. Not only also provide one-on-one sessions for folks, but so that's the first thing. Before anything else, before you can even learn what a good boundary is or how to start, contributing to the solution, you must find your people. And then the second part of this is to understand that, and I know this is cliche, but addiction is a family disease. And if you can just stay with me for a moment and pretend like as a family, you guys waltz, right? Your family dance is a waltz. And everybody, let's say you have 5 other people in your family, everyone's waltzing, but this one person who has a substance use problem, they don't seem to like to waltz very well, right? So this was my experience. So when I got sober, I got off this dance floor. And when I was, in the process of getting sober, I realized, oh, I like to tango. That's why I never liked waltzing, because it's not my dance. So
Mhm.
I jump back on this dance floor after I get home, and everyone's waltzing and I'm tangoing. Can you imagine what's going
Right.
on? And the message that I'm getting from my family is we don't want you to be high. We don't want you to relapse, but we do want you to waltz. So if you could just do that sober and just get into line with everybody else, because that's what we know, right? And I think this is important for mamas to know. I could not stay on that dance floor and waltz, and neither could my son. I had two options. I could either be high on your waltzing dance floor, or I could get off altogether and walk away from those relationships. And what is required and what it means that it's a family disease is that waltzing, if it doesn't work for the addict, it doesn't work, right? If we want to keep those relationships and continue to build trust and rapport. And we have to learn a dance as a family that works authentically for everybody,
Mm,
because the
mhm.
addict cannot be on your dance floor sober. unless everything sort of changes. So oftentimes and I think that that's the first mindset that needs to shift is, oh, this isn't just Johnny's problem, right? Johnny just doesn't need to go away for 28 days and come back and get into line and be okay. This is an us problem. And we all need to learn about addiction. And we all need to understand why Johnny feels like a square peg in a round hole. And Johnny needs to understand why I rescued and enabled him out of fear for so long. And all of a sudden we need to start seeing each other a lot more authentically. And that requires a new dance.
Yeah, I love that analogy. That's a great analogy. Yeah, and you were describing me to a great extent there in that I describe myself sometimes as a recovering codependent,
Yeah.
and I was trying to control out of fear, and I did not get the education early on. We had an intervention for our son, and it was successful at getting him into treatment. And the interventionist told me then, like, hey, man, you need to go to an Al Anon group.
Mm.
And I was like, okay, yeah, I'll do that. And then he calls me a couple of weeks later and he's like, did you go to an Al Anon group yet? And I said, no. And he's like, okay, I'll do it. And I had good intentions, but I didn't understand how important it was to find a group out there, like you were saying, that a group of people who understand you, find your group, find your crowd, whatever it is, whatever term you want to use, but also what you were saying about the family. If the family dynamic doesn't change, and if everybody's not pulling together and the family doesn't get educated about addiction, and that was my mindset. My mindset was, I'm going to send him to treatment. I don't have a problem. I'm going to send him off to treatment. He's going to get well and he's going to come back. And if I throw more money at it, we'll get a better program or whatever. But it
This
was all about me. I was the person.
this is so important because
Yeah.
what if substance was the problem, that
Right.
would have worked.
That's right.
Worked, right? He goes
Yep.
for 28 days. He is, no longer physically addicted to substance. Substance has been removed. He comes back on and he waltzes and everything is fantastic, right?
Right.
But this is the most important part about this is that substance is not the problem. Substance is the solution to the problem. So
Yeah.
if I am using on this dance floor, I get off for 28 days, I come back on and I'm sober, but I don't have any other coping mechanisms to deal with this waltz that does not work for me.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Something about waltzing does not work for me. I'm going to pick up the only coping skill I know. Right? I'm
Right.
going to. And that's the mindset that's got to shift with families is substance is not the problem. Substance is the solution to the problem.
That's right.
And so getting sober is obviously a necessary point to moving towards recovery and transcendence, but it is the very bottom of the ring, right? The rung, right? It's the very foundation, not the house. It doesn't have lumber or drywall or heat and air conditioning or windows or anything else yet, right? And part of the family's dynamic changing is the rest of that house building, and is required in order for somebody to maintain those relationships and stay sober. They can walk away from those relationships and stay sober, but I believe I want to have a relationship with my addicted loved one, and even if and go along in that journey. And the truth is, I have so many clients, and this includes myself, where I now look at addiction as one of the greatest blessings that has happened in my life.
Mm-hmm.
Because it has required my family that's been through it, when we're talking about addiction, to decide together, what dance do we want to dance? And let's learn it together, and let's fumble our way through this and step on each other's toes and mess it up and have to do it over and over again. But it's a dance that we have all decided works for each one of us.
Wow, that's great. Yeah, I love the analogy. You brought it back to the dancing analogy. I love it. Man, this has been great. This has been a really good conversation. Why don't we talk a little bit more about your coaching business now, and exactly how you work with people, how you can help people, and then we'll have you share information with people on how they can get in touch with you.
Yeah, so for about 6 years, I worked in the recovery field. I worked with the addicts themselves, and this goes back to kind of my relationship now with God. Is there was just this pulling that I was experiencing. This, like, we didn't go through all of this together in order for you to just work with the addict. And there was the pulling I could no longer deny. So about a year ago, I started my own business. You spoke of it earlier. It's Rise Addiction Life Coaching, and my focus now is the family. My focus now is, how do we learn this new dance floor? How do I help family members find peace, whether your addicted loved one ever gets sober? And it's such a fulfilling full circle moment for me, right? To be able to use all of these experiences of my life. And I share this, that the one of the things that sort of helped me make this decision is, I will never forget, I was sober for about 6 months, driving down in the car, and I'm telling my husband, like, how amazing this is. Like, oh my gosh, I found my people and I'm doing all this work and I finally feel like I have some worth and all these things. And I look over to him and he's like deadpan. And he said, I'm so happy for you, but I've been going through this for 14 years too. What am I supposed to do? And in that moment, I realized, I was like, oh, he is also suffering. And as the addict, there are resources available, right? And we know about those resources. There's treatment, and there's, facilities, and short-term and long-term, and meetings and all sorts of things. But for the family, there's very few resources. And even the resources that are available, a lot of times people don't know about. So that's one of the reasons why I'm very passionate about what I do. So what I do is I do coaching calls weekly, where, again, people from all over the country get together. And that's really where we find our tribe, right? Our people, that community that I'm trying so hard to develop. And then additionally, I do individual sessions for people to help learn to how to start setting boundaries and sort of start dealing and having coping tools to sit in the hard and to experience those challenges. And then biannually, we do pretty fun wellness retreats where we gather, again, people from all over the country come, and we just love each other, have the best time of connecting and understanding where we've all come from, and some of that grief that we all experience. And so it's just it's hard starting your own business, obviously, but it's just so fulfilling, and I feel so on path in my purpose, and continue to want to reach as many people as possible.
Wow, that's great. That's great. We have a lot of things in common. I'm on a very similar path to you. I do also do interventions,
Mhm.
and some sober transports. I really get in the trenches there, and I learn a lot. And I'm learning. I'm connected to some other interventionists who are all people who are in long-term recovery, and I learn a lot from them as
Yeah.
well. But I love what you're doing, the one-on-ones, the group coaching, and the retreat. I love all of that. It sounds amazing. When you have your retreats, do you do that in Idaho?
So far, they've all been in Idaho, but
Okay.
I do have clients in other parts of the country that I would kind of like to start venturing out to. I
Mhm.
think you can imagine, when you get things rolling from the beginning, you gotta build up to some of these things. But so far, a lot of them have been in the mountains in Idaho, which is a pretty
Oh
amazing
yeah,
to spend a
beautiful
well.
setting for that. Yeah, yeah. I was just thinking that. Wow. Okay, so if you have fly fishing as part of one of your retreats, I want to come.
Yeah, we'll get that on the itinerary.
Okay, well, Jennifer, thank you so much. I appreciate your time. I appreciate you being willing to sit down with me today and share, and just have a conversation, and share with with my audience, and also tell us your story, and just tell us about the work that you're doing. I appreciate all of that, and I've enjoyed this time with you so much, and I hope that we'll have the opportunity to do this again sometime soon.
Love to. It's been my pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you for tuning in to When God Intervenes. If you found today's episode helpful, please subscribe and leave a review. Your feedback helps us reach more families in need of hope and healing. For more resources and support, visit our website at thefamilyrecoverycoach.com. Until next time, stay strong and keep the faith.